So we are smack dab in the middle of this conversation about the stories we grew up hearing that came from the Bible. And I recognize that some of us in this room may not think they actually happened. Others of us believe in some way, shape, or form that the entirety of our faith depends on whether or not they happened. And that's not the point of this discussion, differentiating between those two. The point of this discussion is, what are those stories really about? Who are they really about? What do they have to do with our lives today? And I believe that even if you're sitting here this morning and you go, you know what, those sound all way too crazy to have actually happened, I still believe God has something to show you, teach you, reveal to you through those stories. So I hope you'll give me just a few minutes to explain myself. And we'll start here with a really simple question. What is your number one priority? For some of us, it's health. We work out a lot to try and stay in shape, or we eat certain foods or don't eat other foods to try and look beautiful and feel beautiful and all that kind of stuff. For others of us, we would say, well, duh, it's work. I am there all the time. You look at your time, and that tells you kind of what your priority is. For others of us, it's our family, it's recognition. We are always kind of striving for those things. And I don't know what the order is for you, and I certainly don't know what number one is for you, but maybe try to identify that. And now ask yourself, what's your number one feeling or emotion? What is the thing that you find yourself thinking about or feeling most of the time, most of the days? Odds are you listed something like tired. Some of you might have said bored. Some of you might have said I'm frustrated. Some of you might have said I'm lonely or I'm depressed. And oftentimes we look at those feelings and we go, the issue there is us. We are not enough of something. Right? We're not smart enough, we're not strategic enough, we're not thrifty enough, we're not something, right? And that's why we feel that way. What I want to do today is make the argument that maybe, just maybe, that's your number one feeling because of what your number one priority is. And what if this is less of a personal thing and it's more of a practical thing? What if it's less about the components of our lives and more about the order of those components that makes all the difference in how we feel and how we navigate our life? Think of it like this. If we were looking at a train and we were going to put one together piece by piece, and I started with this piece, you would say it goes in which of these 5 positions? One. Right? We're batting 1,000 there. If we went around the room, everybody in this room would say the engine goes in the first spot. Why? That's because that's where the power is, right? It's strong, and it can pull incredible amounts of weight and an incredible number of cars behind it. But you've got to get the engine in the number one spot, because if you put it anywhere else, you're going to have a problem. Now, the rest of the cars that we pull out, you could make an argument that they could go anywhere, right? It doesn't matter what order you put them in. And you might like some better than the others, and you would want them to be further up. And some might even argue, well, you got to put the caboose in the last spot because that's the definition of caboose. You could put the caboose anywhere. It doesn't matter. Have you ever thought about that? Now, what's going to happen with positions 2 through 5 given that this is in the first position? It's not a trick question. They're going to go wherever number 1 goes. Everything else will line up behind this spot, right? And so it doesn't matter if we think that number 4 should be in number 4, as long as we understand that number 1 has to be in number 1. It also means that there's nothing inherently bad about this. You see, we spend so much time, and there are so many blogs written and all kinds of arguments made about what should be the individual parts of your life. And if you just get all the individual parts right, they'll add up to something great. And I'm going to say there's nothing wrong with this one. Don't worry as much about this one being in this spot. Just make sure it's not in this spot. Now there's an issue. Number 4 doesn't have any trouble unless you put it in number 1. Doesn't matter where else it goes, just don't give it the number 1 spot. If we put the engine in part 4, will the train move? Yeah, it will. Now you'll notice our train has no tracks, and I do that on purpose because life doesn't have any tracks, does it? As much as you wish you knew exactly where it was going to go and how it was going to work, and you just flip a switch and everything goes where it should go, that's not how life works. So this train has no tracks, just like your train has no tracks. And yes, the train would move, but what is going to happen in positions 1 through 3? They're going to go all over the place. They're going to push, some will go to the left, some will go to the right. And you'll make it move, you just won't make it move in a singular direction that's pointing in a way, moving in a way, getting to a place that you want it to be. And this is the issue that we face. And this is the issue that Samson, the real first avenger, faced in his life. And what I believe Samson's story is about has little to do with his physical appearance or ability, little to do with his haircut choices, and more to do with what gets number 1. Because you and I are only as strong as our number 1. You're only as strong as your number 1. What you give that first position is going to determine the amount of strength and agility and direction that you get to have in your life. That is a really cool car that we put in that first place, and a lot of people might admire it, but it's not going to get you anywhere. And in fact, all of the rest will be affected because of what has been put in that first place. Now, Samson, our guy, our hero, he's one of my favorite Bible stories that I ever heard when I was a kid, was a Nazirite. Now, Nazirite were really interesting people. We always think that Samson was just super strong, and that's the whole story. The truth is, his birth was announced by a messenger from God, and his parents gave what is called a Nazirite vow for his life. Some would take this vow for a certain amount of time. Others, it was a lifelong thing, and Samson wasn't the only one. In fact, John the Baptist is technically a Nazirite, and it's this vow, and there were 3 major components of this vow. Number 1, you never drink alcohol of any kind or in any form. They took that so far that you couldn't even eat grapes off the vine because that grape might have sat there too long and made you a little too dizzy, right? So they don't touch anything even remotely related to alcohol. They also would never touch a dead body, whether it was an animal or a human, and then they would never cut their hair. For their life or the duration of their vow, they'd let their hair grow. So here's what's cool is that most of us think that Samson got his power because he had really long hair, and I'm going to argue that that's actually subsequent. Because what a Nazirite was all about was devotion to God. What being a Nazirite was all about was I am set apart. I have a special dedication for my life or this period of my life that is all about God. And what these physical things that I'm going to do or the way that I'm going to appear are the proof that I'm all about those things. It's almost like an identification badge. You would know that so-and-so had made this level of commitment to God because of the way they looked and the way that they behaved. Action, right? I think that all of that vow and all of those parts in Samson's life was all about reminding others and including himself who he is and whose he is. So when he walks around, people go, he belongs to God. He's serious about his faith. And when he looks in the mirror, he goes, I belong to God. I'd taken this vow and I'm doing these things, and this is what helps me remember and everybody else understand what my life is all about. In essence, what the lack of alcohol and the no dead bodies and the cool hair was saying, God gets number 1. He directs my life, he orders my life, and everything else flows behind him. he gets the number one spot. What the hair was all about was devotion. Now, for whatever reason, Samson's life comes with a bonus, and God gives him this supernatural strength. I mean, he killed a lion with his bare hands. He defeated an entire army, not with an axe, not with a sword, but with a jawbone from a donkey. That's something, right? So Samson, for whatever reason, gets these special abilities, but make no mistake, he is totally human. And how I encourage you to read this story or listen to this story is not what a knucklehead Samson is, but more, Samson's me. And his humanity is a lot like my humanity. And while I may not have superhuman strength, I can identify with these parts of who he is. And so there's a ton of story that happens in his life, but I want to jump in at the place where he finds the one. Really like the third one. But he starts to act like she's the one. He starts to fall in love with a woman named Delilah. This is how it goes, actually. Sometime later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. Now, here's what's interesting about this. Not where she's from, not what her name is, but this concept that Samson fell in love with her. Now, at first glance, we attach our very American thinking to this, and we think Valentine's Day. We think googly eyes. We think, I'll do anything for you. Will you take this rose, right? Like, this is what it means to fall in love. But the language here is used in other parts of the Old Testament scriptures, and that same phrase, fell in love, is interpreted, allowed his heart to be turned away. And so we read something and we think like virtuous, like falling in love is great and it's awesome. But for the one who's recording this story, what's really being communicated is his heart, the number one spot in his life, has been given to someone else. And he has reprioritized things to look differently. His heart has turned away. Because here's the reality of devotion. Devotion is entirely a heart issue. What you're dedicated to most comes from here. And of course, I don't mean the muscle that's pumping the blood through your body. I mean the center of who you are, what defines you. And we all have something that gets in that first spot, and that is a heart issue. This is a picture of your heart because everyone's heart operates on a priority-based system. You have spots 1 through 3 or 1 through 5 or 1 through 10. And so you can give a piece of your heart to a lot of different things. You live this out every day. You have maybe, like me, 4 kids. Well, my 4 kids get a little bit of my heart. But there's only one spot for number one. There's not like 1A, 1B. There's not a tie, right? There's just one spot. And that one spot gives definition and direction to all of the other spots. In some ways, you could argue it defines your heart. It defines who you are because it's driving everything else. And so your heart, yourself, will play this game of trading number one positions. And there will come times in our life where we go, well, I don't like how far down the list this one has fallen. And so we'll do work to try and move it up, and then we'll try and trade it out, and we'll put other things in there, and we think we're fixing the problem, but we've never really addressed the real issue. Is that we haven't given the one who should have priority, real priority. Because this makes us money. This gets us recognition. This gives us belonging, this thing. And so if we believe if we trade that out, things are going to go haywire. But the truth is it's already going haywire because all of the strength, all of the power in your life is way down the list. And you're trying to get your train to be driven by something that can't drive it. And that's why we feel the way we feel. Because there's only one rightful owner of the number one spot. So Delilah gets hired by the Philistines, who are the enemies of Samson and the Israelites at the time. They say, hey, we'll pay you if you tell us the secret to his strength, because every Superman has a kryptonite. So if you find that for us and you tell us, we'll pay you handsomely. So do what you can. She goes to work. She asks Samson, what's the secret to your strength? And 3 different times he gives her an answer, all bogus answers, not the real reason that he's as strong as he is. And I'm convinced part of it is he didn't really understand what made him strong in the first place. And so he gives these 3 bogus answers. Delilah tells the Philistines, they come and try and capture him. They tie him up, all these different things, and he busts out and he defeats them over and over again, and they get frustrated, and she's frustrated, and so she sits down to have a talk with Samson. And here's what's I'm so captivated by when it comes to Delilah. She understands that. And what she points out is that she doesn't actually have number 1 because of the way he's proven that in their relationship. This is what she says to him. How can you tell me I love you when you don't share your secrets with me? She tormented him with her nagging day after day until he was sick to death of it. Now, some people read that and go, this is marital counseling. Please understand that it's not. What this is all about is helping you and I understand that our affection is insanely tied to our submission. Because we made the argument from the very beginning that if you put the power in the front, then everything else will have to bend to the will of that thing. It'll have to submit. Where the engine pulls, everything else is going to go. And so Delilah says, you can't have given me the number 1 spot because you aren't doing what I'm telling you to do. You aren't giving me what I'm asking for. You would if I was actually number 1, if you were actually loving me the way you say you are and had this level of affection and devotion for me, you would tell me. Because affection and submission are always tied together. Now, the nagging piece is less about their relationship and more about helping us understand that number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 72 always, always, always want to be number 1. Number 2 is always going to try and angle its way into the front of the line every time, all day. Everything in your life wants your number 1 spot. It wants all of your heart because those things, even though they don't think, maybe even some of the people don't think about it, they want to be in control. They want to have sovereignty in your life and dominion in your life and authority in your life. And so it'll always be bumping up, trying to get to that number 1 spot. And here's the reality that we have to come to grips with. It is very exhausting to try and hold all that at bay. It gets tiring. And we get to the place, whether you are like super Christian or new to this whole thing, you get to the place where you're just tired and you're weak. And you don't have the ability anymore to resist, and some of us will relax and allow number 2 or 3 or whatever to creep into that number 1 spot. And what's amazing is we'll start to feel crummy about that, and we start to beat ourselves up like we aren't enough of something, but the problem is not you. The problem is the way you're doing you. The problem is the way you're arranging things. And so Samson gets tired, and he finally tells her, "It's my hair." And this is what happens next. Delilah realized he'd finally told her the truth. So she sent for the Philistine rulers. "Come back one more time," she said, "for he has finally told me his secret." Translation, he's finally let me have number 1. I got him. So the Philistine rulers returned with the money in their hands. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap. And then she called in a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. Real quick, I read that and I go, man, that sounds like a good nap. Where you're going to be sleeping that hard that someone could cut your hair and you not realize. In this way, she began to bring him down, and his strength left him. Then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." When he woke up, he thought, I'll do as I've done before and shake myself free. But he didn't realize the Lord had left him. Notice what he didn't realize. He didn't realize that He didn't realize that his hair had left him. He didn't realize that his strength had left him. He didn't realize that his vow had left him. What left him? The Lord. He didn't realize that the Lord had left him. And what we see here, this should be the light bulb moment in the story. Samson's strength never came from his hair. Samson's strength came from his God. And the hair was a symbol, was an identifier, was an outward expression of strength that God was giving him. And you go, well, why did the Lord lead when he cut his hair then? Because remember, the hair was a symbol of devotion. And if you remove the hair, you are in essence removing your devotion. And if you aren't going to be devoted, then the Lord is moving down the ladder. You see, it was never about the hair. Never. This was about Samson's priorities. Samson's devotion. It was about his heart and who it belonged to. And in the end, when he gave it to someone that wasn't God, everything fell off the rails. And Samson became weak. And this is why I say, you are only as strong as your number one. And we all try different number ones, right? There's a lot of us that have said, well, my number one thing is going to be money because money is happiness and money is power and money is this and that. And you've been around long enough to remember what happened in 2008. Your number one let you down. And there are several of us that could raise our hands and testify to the fact that even though I gave it priority, it did not give me priority. And it took me in a direction that I didn't see, and I was weak and I lost it and I fell apart and I'm still trying to get it back together. Some of us have said, well, I'm going to put this relationship with her or him in this place because that makes me feel good and that makes me feel like life makes sense and all of that kind of stuff. But then they left you. They broke up with you. And you feel like nothing makes sense anymore. Weak, broken, alone, right? You name it, whatever we put in this place. We learn, unfortunately, the hard way that those things aren't strong enough to get us through the challenges that we're going to face in our life. Samson realizes that Delilah in the number one spot is not going to give him the strength that he's become accustomed to navigate this battle with the Philistines. And because he's not strong anymore, the Philistines capture him. It says next, they gouged out his eyes. They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and forced to grind grain in the prison. Samson, the hero of Israel, carrying the title of judge and world's strongest man, is reduced to a common slave. By the way, they gouge out his eyes. This is mentioned specifically because this is what the Philistines do when they conquer someone. It's a symbol of that they have gained number one by force, but now Samson has to submit to them. And just so that everybody knows, we're going to gouge out his eyes so that he's helpless and weak and dependent on us. It's the inverted side of the hair. See, things will always push for number one. And sometimes when we give that number one, we become slave to it. And so they stick him down in this cellar and he has to grind grain. Now here's what's kind of hidden in this. And if you don't know pagan mythology or theology, you would miss it. I didn't know this either, but grain belongs to the Philistine god Dagon. And so what essentially they're doing is they've humiliated him physically, but now they're going to humiliate him spiritually. And they're going to make him serve a pagan god because that grain belongs to Dagon. And I just wonder what Samson thought about down there in that cellar. Working day and night. You know how that is. You get into a routine and all of a sudden your brain starts to swim and chew and work on things. And I just have this hunch that it was in that time the lowest point in his life, where Samson started to look at his list. And he started to realize what had happened. And it wasn't that he got a crew cut. It was that he had allowed someone, something else to take God's place. And in that pit, grinding that grain, I believe that he began to reprioritize. I believe that he started to put first things first. I don't think he worried so much about these spots. I think he became solely focused on this one, and here's why that's my hunch. Verse 22 says this, but before long, his hair began to grow back. And it's easy to go, well, that's why he gets strong again. If you know the end of the story, he has a kind of a grand finale, and you go, well, his hair grows back, so he gets strong. No. Remember, these are just outward expressions of a heart issue. And so I believe that his hair begins to grow back in step with the place he begins to give God again. And things start to make sense. But then they come and get him one day. They pull him up out of the cellar, and he asks, where are we going? And they say, well, it's Dagon's festival. And you are very entertaining. And so they haul him into the temple of Dagon, and they're harassing him and probably spitting on him and shoving him around. Who's got you now, Samson? Again, the big champion reduced to a court jester. And then there's this point where Samson looks to number one again. And he says a simple prayer, but uses words in that simple prayer that are so profound and so revealing about how his brain and ultimately his heart have reordered things. These are the words to his prayer. He says, Sovereign Lord, remember me again. Oh God, please strengthen me just one more time. With one blow, let me pay back the Philistines for the loss of my two eyes. Sovereign Lord. That word sovereign is no small thing. What Samson is saying or confessing or proclaiming in those words is that God, you are number one. Because the engine has sovereignty over the entire train. It decides where it's going to go, how fast it's going to get there, what direction it's going to take. The engine has sovereignty, so when finally Samson goes, Sovereign Lord, in other words, the one with all the authority, the one with all the power, the one with all the dominion, including over me. That's a huge change from how he'd lived his entire life, even though he'd been experiencing God's favor. It's in this moment. He says, God, you are number one. And then he goes on to say, Sovereign God, number one, will you please strengthen me? In other words, the strength I've had all of my life did not come from me. It did not come from my hair or my vow. It came from you. My strength is your strength that you gave to me. My strength is not my strength that I grew, but it was bestowed upon me by you. And I realized that I let things get out of order, and so I became weak. But will you strengthen me one more time, because I'm putting you in your rightful position. And you know how the story goes. God answers his prayer. Samson finds himself between the two center pillars of the temple. He pushes them apart, and the roof comes down. We realize that Samson was only as strong as his number one. You and me, we're only as strong as our number one. It was only when he put God where he rightfully belonged did Samson experience the strength to navigate the battle. Now I read that and I get to the end of it, maybe you do too, and here's what I think. Lucky Samson. Because, if God gave me bulging biceps and flowing hair and the ability to kill the king of the jungle with my bare hands, I would live by faith too. Wouldn't you? I mean, if God visited you and was like, hey, I'm going to make you superhumanly strong, and everybody's going to ooh and ah over you, and you're going to be considered a champion, Will you follow me if I do that for you? Everybody would be like, yeah, no question. You couldn't stop me as a Christian. If I just had Samson's life, Samson's relationship with God. But we forget Hebrews, where this whole thing started. Remember the list in Hebrews? The heroes, the hall of fame of our faith concludes with this idea that you and I have something better. What could be better than being Thor? What could be better than being the Incredible Hulk minus the green skin? What could be better than that? And the writer of Hebrews says, here's what's better than that. Jesus. You live on the other side of the resurrection. You have the proof upon proof upon proof. God defeated our greatest enemy in that moment. He defeated death. He defeated Satan. He defeated it all. You have a champion. What more proof do you need? And here's how I look at this, and I say this a lot, but if someone can predict their own death and their own resurrection and then do it to the letter, he gets number one. Full stop. Because he's the strongest that I've ever heard of. And if I want to navigate my life, I'm going to bank on him. And here's what's amazing is he is exactly who he says he is. And when I submit, when I give him my affection and when I give him my number one, the rest of my life starts to go in that direction. It doesn't mean you won't have bumps. It doesn't mean you won't have challenges. It doesn't mean that things won't go off the rails every once in a while. But what it does mean is you're being led from a place of strength. Because Jesus is who he says he is. So here's the question for you and I that's really difficult to be honest about. But what's your number one priority? Back to the beginning. Now, you're like me, and you go to church, you call yourself a Christian, right? And so the Sunday school answer is, well, my number one priority is God, obviously. But if we're being truthful with ourselves, honest with ourselves, our real life may show something different. And so if you want to get an honest look at your priorities, what has number one, this is what I recommend. This week, take out your calendar. You carry it in your pocket, most of you, but take it out and take an honest look at it and take an inventory of where you spend your time. And I'll be honest, and this is silly but serious. If you look at my time, I spend an awful lot of time watching television. And if someone objective were to look at my calendar, if I put my TV time in my calendar, someone would go, your number one priority in your life? Television. Easy. I may not like that answer, but that's the honest answer. Another place they could look for me is they could look at my checkbook and where I'm spending my money. And you know what someone might say? Josh's number one priority in life is Taco Bell. And you know why you're laughing? You're laughing because that sounds absolutely insane. Why would anyone make Taco Bell their number one priority in their life? And you know what I'm saying? You're right. But we do it, right? We get tired, we get weak, and we allow other things to take the number one spot, and we don't even realize it. And if you're looking into that and you're like, I don't really like the answers I'm getting here, or you're kind of kidding yourself, here's what I triple dog dare you to do. Get with a friend that you trust and that you know loves you, and just ask them to be honest. When you observe my life, what would you say is my number one priority? What would you say? And encourage them, please don't lie to me. Please don't try and butter me up or make me feel good. Don't think about the answer that you think that I think I want you to say. Just tell me the gut level truth. What are the priorities of my life? And again, you may come to the place where you realize the engine that you thought was there is not there, and that several other things are not in the order that you want them to do. And what we would likely say is, I can't do anything about this. I got to go to work. I got to sleep. I got to do some of these things in my life. So how in the world am I supposed to actually do anything about the realities that I have to face every day? Here's what I'm going to encourage you to do, just like Samson did. Grind the grain for a little while. Because it was in that moment where he really got a clear picture of what his life was all about. And it was in that moment that he began to reprioritize some things. And I believe that God sometimes allows us to get to the place where we've got to grind it out to figure it out. And here's how you do it. Start with God. It starts with a conscious decision to put him first. You're not going to get far unless you start there. God is going to be number one again, or number one for the first time, or number one for the 101st time, because I continually have to reprioritize. But it's this decision to say, I am going to put him first, and I'm going to let everything else line up accordingly. And once you get that decided upon and you set that as your true north, the next thing that I would encourage you to do is reflect. And here's what I mean by reflect. It's a really simple question that terrifies me, but I'm really trying to wrestle to the ground lately. What would Jesus be most proud of in me in 10 years? What could I do or become over the course of the next 10 years that would make Jesus the most proud of me? Because we get caught up in the urgent, right? We do. There's all kinds of things shouting at us for our attention and all of that stuff all of the time. And so it's really difficult to sort that out right now. But if you think a decade from now, what would be true of me that Jesus would go, I love that. That's what I wanted for them. What would that be? And suddenly, some of the direction that you believe God is taking your life starts to crystallize for you. And you get this place that you can orient everything around. So next, take inventory. Sit down with your calendar. Sit down with your checkbook. Sit down with a friend and list out, these are the things that are of importance to me, that I give my utmost to. You might even look at it as these are the things that challenge for God's position, rightful position in my life. Be honest with that. List those out. And then highlight the things that actually point to that thing you reflected on. And then the next step is the most difficult step. You have to begin to neutralize the clutter. If you've watched the Netflix show with Tidying Up, you've seen this, right? They dump everything out on the bed. And one by one, they ask, does this give me joy? If you've tried this, it's very overwhelming. It will be very overwhelming in this case, too. But you pick one thing up from your calendar, one thing up from your checkbook at a time, and you go, does this bring me to God and what he wants for my life? If the answer is no, get rid of it. Neutralize it. Be done with it. Quit it. And then with what's left, you begin to design your week. You take the big rocks that point you in the direction that God is calling you to go, and you stick them on your calendar, literally put them there. And then you let everything else fit in. But what's going to happen is there's going to be times where you go, I don't have any room for that. Because God's driving this now. There's no room on that train for that. But you've decided to allow him to be the one who pulls you through. And what you might realize is that instead of trying to pull strong all the time and get your life to where it is, you realize you're being pulled strong. Because you're only as strong as your number one. You see, when we get the right thing in the right place, it will take us through the greatest challenges of our life. They will exist, they will happen, we will face them, but we're being driven and pulled and carried by one strong enough to get through it. Jesus said, I've defeated the world. So anything you face in the world, I got. So just hang on. Let me have number one and hang on. And what happens is everything gets pulled up behind that and begins to align and starts to make sense, and you make some motion. You take some ground. Not because you become strong, not because you become smarter, not because you have more money, but because you have given God his place in your life, and he's strong enough to carry you exactly where he wants you to be. That is the meaning in the story of Samson. It's not grow your hair out. It's not do more of anything. It's reprioritize. Give God his rightful position, and he'll take it from there. Will you pray with me? Lord, as we get ready to head out into the busy week ahead of us, it will be easy for the urgent things to take that position that should be reserved for you. It will be easy to forget. We'll get tired. We'll get exhausted. And we'll let things slip. So will you help us to notice when that happens? Will you help us to be courageous enough to pause and reorder? Will you help us to grind out what our priorities are, what they really are? And ultimately give you your place that only you deserve in our heart, our utmost devotion, our utmost affection. Lord, we want to start the week by just saying, we trust you, we believe in you, because you've given us something better than Samson ever had. You. And the grave has a vacancy. So help us to live with that kind of faith and that kind of courage. In Jesus' name.